Before you start scratching, you need to decide which hand to use on the record and which hand to use on the crossfader. Ideally, it would be great to be able to scratch equally well with both hands, but it takes so much time and practice just to get good on one side, so most DJs choose to focus on that side only. DJs usually choose naturally which side they prefer, in the same way that we naturally begin holding a crayon and start drawing with one hand or the other when we were a kid. There's definitely no right or wrong way, it all comes down to personal preference and what feels right to you. My personal preference is to control the fader with my strongest right hand and control the record with my weaker hand. I learnt this way because it felt most natural and comfortable to me. Let's look at the benefits and drawbacks of each option. First off, I'll cover using your dominant hand on the record. The main benefits are that you have your strongest hand controlling the movement of the record backwards and forwards. This allows for a greater level of expression and can really pay off in the long run. I've spoken to many DJs and a lot of them said that if they were starting over again, they would choose to use their dominant hand on the record because of the level of control that is possible. Techniques such as tears, faderless scratches and record tapping or push techniques, which require a finer level of control, may be easier to learn. If your dominant hand is your right hand, this also gives a more anatomically efficient, natural movement when your record hand moves backwards and forwards. Again, if your right hand is on the record, your thumb is positioned on the outside of the vinyl, which means you can use it for different scratch techniques, such as using your thumb to touch the edge of the platter to achieve various effects. If you are using your right hand on the record, the distance between the record and the mixer is less, which can make it easier to do crossover scratch techniques, for example using the crossfader and the volume fader alternately, moving backwards and forwards between the record and the mixer. The overall area in which you're moving your hands is much smaller compared to the left hand side, which as you can see is a much greater area. The main drawbacks are that you might find the more complicated fader movements, such as the twiddle and crab, are harder and take longer to learn initially with your weaker hand, which can be discouraging when you're just starting out. When you are using your weaker hand on the crossfader, it may feel similar to learning to write with your opposite hand to usual, kind of awkward and unnatural. Now let's look at using your dominant hand on the crossfader. The main benefits are that you're more likely to have a finer level of control using your stronger hand, making the crossfader movements easier to learn. The more complicated fader techniques, such as twiddles and crabs, will be learnt quicker and easier. Using your stronger hand on the fader will most likely give you more immediate results, which can be really encouraging when you're just starting out. Record control is generally easier to learn than fader control in degree of difficulty. If you are new to DJing, you may feel that using your weaker hand on the vinyl doesn't actually feel that much different to using your dominant hand, because these are new skills and techniques that are unfamiliar anyway. If your right hand is dominant, your fader hand is closer to the start, stop and speed selection buttons on the left turntable of some older models like Technics or Vestax, which is handy for various scratch techniques and tricks. The main drawback is that vinyl control may be harder and take longer to learn with your weaker hand, and you might never have the same control that you would get using your dominant hand. That sums up the benefits and drawbacks of each option. I hope it gives you an insight into which hand you might like to use on the record and the crossfader. If you're still unsure, just get stuck in and experiment with what feels best for you. I recommend learning all the scratch techniques on one side first, then you'll know how to apply them to the other side if and when you're ready to do so. If you're starting out as a beginner, you could make the habit of then practicing everything on both sides and try to progress both hands at the same rate. And this can be really useful if you want to get into battling and scratching on both sides, just like someone like DJ Craze does.